and take you to the IEC's research seminar. And let's get more now on the 2-decade review of the country's electoral system. The Commission has been conducting numerous election-related surveys to gauge the level of public perceptions and the trends of South African voters in the electoral democracy. Well, the IEC teamed up with the Human Sciences Research Council to conduct these studies. Let's find out what came out of that. And our reporter, Mbali Thethani, attended this particular seminar. Mbali, good morning to you. Key highlights out of that seminar.
That's certainly right, Chloe. Of course, we have seen for much of this morning those very important reports coming out, especially from the HSRC, just looking at when it comes to voter apathy and also quite alarming, the voter turnout, especially during the last elections, which were the local government elections held last year. And bringing in now the researcher who spent much of this morning just telling us about, what you went through when it comes to looking into the reports in which you have presented here today. I must say that something that is quite striking is indeed the voter apathy, especially from young South Africans.
Yes, we've obviously looked in partnership with the Electoral Commission at long-term trends in several things. One is democratic attitudes, both in terms of the demand for democracy, views on performance of democracy. We secondly have looked at electoral attitudes and how those are changing over time, over the better part of 2 decades. And also we've tried to reflect on what does that mean for electoral behaviour, the decisions that people make around whether or not to turn out in any particular election cycle. I wouldn't say it's necessarily apathy. It is a general, people feel very strongly about democracy in elections, but the question is more about a sort of broader disillusionment that seems to have increasingly characterized the voting age public. We've seen, for instance, that satisfaction with democracy has dropped dramatically, as has trust in a range of core political institutions. On the electoral front, we're seeing the duty to vote has typically been very high. It remains high, but has started to drop in the last 5 to 7 years. And importantly, it's also related to what we call political efficacy. Do I feel my vote makes a difference? Do I feel that the elected officials are acting in the interests and needs of the public? And in those 2 cases in particular, we've seen a very negative view come through over time, over the last 10 years in particular. And that really matters very significantly for people's decisions to want to turn out in an election.
When you look at that voter turnout, what did you find was that, you get more South Africans who are not willing to go to the polls and cast their vote for these various political parties. I mean, we've seen an increase in political parties since the dawn of democracy. One would say that now that people have more choice, that would even push them further to come in and actually cast their vote. What did you find is the one thing that actually turns people away from voting, especially when you look at last year's result?
Well, the main reason that people give themselves is different aspects of that disillusionment, which is a reflection of a sense that the elected are not operating. So that's parties, politicians are not operating in the interests and meeting the needs and expectations of the public. And that applies to about 2/3 of responses given. So it's not about issues of an administrative nature or what the Electoral Commission is necessarily doing. It's really about the broader political scene and beliefs around whether the interests are being met or not. And that is linked also to broader views around democracy. So these beliefs around the way the elected are conducting themselves, the issues around does my vote actually materially matter on a day-to-day basis in terms of my lived reality in the country. And that's really what we're seeing playing out, and it's what's shaping the evaluations of democracy as a whole.
What does that mean and translate to when you look at the future of this country, when you look at, what can we expect in the coming years? Broadly, what does it mean for the electoral processes of this country?
As I said, in the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen real decline in quite a few of these indicators. What we want to hope to do is try and stop that further decline from playing out, because it will materially matter for turnout in subsequent elections if we see these patterns continue. In addition, what we want to do is we need to recognise that South Africa is a particularly youthful population, and amongst our youth we see quite a harsh evaluation on a lot of these particular indicators. So given that they now represent quite a large share of the electorate, and a lot of young South Africans have not even registered or had their first electoral experience. So that is a worry, because we have some element of a culture of voting. Once you've voted, you have a relative tendency to turn out in future elections. So trying to deal with these sentiments and this concern about the elected and parties and representation, and even appeals for accountability, that we hope to see start changing. It speaks to various constituencies. The way the parties conduct themselves, the way the politicians meet the needs or don't of citizens is really instrumental in any election context.
And lastly, Dr. Ben, what is it, how important is this research now that you've looked back on the voter trends and going forward? What lessons can be learned for the future?
I think it's really important that we continue to monitor. This is a partnership between the Human Sciences Research Council and the Electoral Commission of South Africa. This goes back 2 decades. It is an evidence-based electoral management body. It's trying to inform its operational planning around what they're seeing from the voices of the people, and do that to inform future electoral planning operations. It also is about civic and democracy education. It's also through the National Party Liaison Committee. It's trying to engage with politicians and share these findings and have those important conversations about what the public now wants in terms of trying to shore up the sort of views and future of not only electoral democracy but a liberal democracy as a whole.
All right, thank you very much. Of course, that is Dr. Ben Roberts. He is from the HSRC, basically conducted the voter trends, especially when you look at for the past couple of years, when we continue to see, the voter turnout continuing to dwindle in the country.
Thethani, thank you very much for that update. Very worrying trends for those who follow.